You ready?
Kind of. What did you do with that's the thing they say?
The clippable.
What do they say then? What do they say?
3,
Action.
2, 1.
Action.
Okay, why you got to take one?
Sorry, I thought we'd do it together.
Okay, 3, 2. Oh, hello YouTube community and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm joined by history teacher, my colleague and sometimes friend, Mr. Roberts, and we're here to talk to you about spectacles and the historical context to help you make better AO3 links in your exam that's coming up very soon. So AO3 is worth 6 marks of the 30 marks you can get. So 6 marks are quite important. And here it's about you making the connection between the context and linking it back to the text. And I find that sometimes students quite struggle with that. If they do make links, they're usually a little bit meh. So here we've got Mr. Roberts. So we're here, Mr. Roberts. So hopefully he can give you make more meaningful connections to the time period.
I suppose in essence what we're going to try and do is if you have a better understanding of the historical context, it's only going to extend your analysis. But what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and focus on some of the historical context, but we're going to link them into quotes. So the whole time while you're watching this, we will be focusing our analysis for what you need for your exam, and I'm going to be here trying to add snippets of some historical knowledge to help you extend your overall perspective. And what we're going to try and do, I suppose, is quote by quote really try and pull it apart, but also try and link it into the historical context.
Yes,
but just don't focus too much on it. As a historian, it's hard for me to say that, shed a tear, but it's as Miss said, you said 6 marks, right?
Yes.
Okay, 6 marks. Don't spend too much time on it, but if it helps you to understand the play better,
and make more meaningful links really as well, because I always find it kind of gets a bit funny or meh around that stage. Okay, so let's start off. So as we know, it was written in 1945, but it was set in 1912, and so this is quite a big factor because times had obviously changed, right, during this time period. 1945 was a very different time to 1912. Would you like to explain why?
Okay, so the two things you need to understand is we have Edwardian Britain, which starts roughly around 1900 and ends at the outbreak of the First World War. Now, Edwardian Britain really was quite a short period, but it was quite distinctively different to the Victorian era, which came before it. A couple of reasons for that. There was a growing sense of class consciousness. Also, as well, this was the peak of the British Empire. And in essence, what you need to think of is, okay, so the play is set in Edwardian Britain, and the kind of ideas of class consciousness, the Enlightenment period, thinking about the individual.
What do you mean by the Enlightenment period?
Okay, so the Enlightenment period was a perspective or an opinion that grew from the 18th century, really, and it was about promoting the individual, social welfare, the welfare state, having a look, going beyond and trying to break down some of these barriers in terms of social hierarchy, social class. In the Victorian era, you could argue that social hierarchy and social class was very rigid, and the Edwardian period very much so too. However, flipping into when the play was actually written, post-World War II Europe was a scarred place. People had lost a lot. They'd lost a lot of family members, and society was really hurting. And interestingly, in the time in which the play was written, and Priestley being a socialist himself, it was a peak of socialist perspectives. And what you could argue is, post-World War II, in 1945, amazingly, Winston Churchill, a national hero, victorious World War II hero, in 1945 loses the election to a Labour government under Clement Attlee. And what happened was, with the new Labour government, we have new ideas about the welfare state. So you could argue, and this is the comparison I'm trying to create, is that when the play was written, we have ideas of socialism, the welfare state, but the origins of those ideas was during the Edwardian period. And to link into in spectacles, when you think about someone like Eric, which we're going to talk about quite a bit, we've got a really good quote that we're going to pull apart for him. You see how Eric has a tendency, a lingering of some of these Edwardian younger perspectives, and then Mr. Burling is your stereotypical conservative. archaic, even Victorian perspective.
Okay, so we're going to basically start off with these quotations, and then we look at how we can make those connections then to the text themselves. So let's start.
That's fine.
Okay, so we're going to start with the first quote about, this is during the conversation with why Mr. Berlin decided to have Eva fired. So as we know, or you should know, is Mr. Berlin fires Eva Smith from his works because she asked for a pay rise.
Yeah.
And a few of them did. And he didn't like the fact that, you know, she had too much to say for herself. And so in that sense, he could fire her because there's loads of other girls at the time he could easily replace her with. And so Gerald goes, you couldn't have done anything else. And Eric goes, he could have kept her on instead of throwing her out. I call it tough luck. And Mr. Berlin goes, rubbish. If you don't come down sharply on these people, they'll soon be asking for the earth. So,
okay.
I think here you can see both Gerald and Mr. Berlin quite having similar ideas, and then you see Eric here kind of challenging those ideas that these two are thinking. As you were saying before, Eric is that one who's very much about,
newer perspectives,
newer ideas, being able to be a bit more empathetic towards those of the lower classes or working class, where Gerald being the upper class and Mr. Berlin being part of the capitalist class, they see as, well, there wasn't anything else he could do. That is what, that making a decision to fire her was the only decision. Thinking about capitalists and socialists. So what is a capitalist and what is a socialist?
You need to know that. You need to be able to define those things, but link them into characters, right?
So capitalists
is promotion of capital within the individual. You are able to make as much money as you like, and it's all about you and your capital and private enterprise, those sorts of things.
Okay, and socialists?
Socialism really is about promoting the ownership of the community as a whole.
Right.
There is a difference between communism and socialism. You could argue that communism is more a state-controlled form of socialism, and maybe you guys watching this could probably have even better perspective, even better insight. But in truth, socialism really, from my perspective, is about promoting the use of the community for the benefit of the community.
Okay. I always see it, the easy way to remember it is capitalism is like a triangle. You have the very few on the top, but then you have those at the bottom who help to build those at the top. And socialism is like a square. Everyone's equal in how we see things.
And there's like a cycle, I suppose, of socialism of promoting the benefits of the community.
Yes, definitely. So Marx was a big factor in regards to communist socialist ideas, right?
Yeah, so Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx were both German philosophers. In 1848 they published the Communist Manifesto. The Communist Manifesto was at first heavily criticised.
And weren't they themselves quite ostracised from society for their views that they had?
Yeah, they were, yeah. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, especially Karl Marx, they were ostracised. And again, people were, hang on, I'm working hard, I've got my business, this is my position in society, why do I need to give back to the poor? And even nowadays, when we have tax and those sorts of things, people are often reluctant to do that, and that kind of attitude. So at the latter part of the 19th century, these ideas were new, they were often rejected, and the people were ostracised. That Communist Manifesto, you could argue, were the origins of those opinions.
So we have the two, so capitalists kind of represent the bourgeoisie, and the ones that did
promotion of capital, money.
This is where you kind of get the saying, like, oh, they're bougie. I didn't realise the other day, I finally clocked on, I was like, oh, bougie comes from bourgeoisie. I was like, why did I clock on? Anyways, and then the proletariat would be the working class. So people like Eva Smith would be the proletariat, where people like Mr. Berlin and Gerald would be part of the bourgeoisie. And the bourgeoisie didn't want change because, again, it would affect them.
See the Edwardian period, see the growth of the proletariat. Conditions were terrible for working in these Victorian, even though this is set in the beginning of the 20th century, these sort of Victorian workhouses, like Oliver Twist and things like that. Yes, okay.
Oliver Twist in my head.
Okay, so some conditions did improve, but in truth they weren't what we understand of today in relation to human rights and things like that. And Mr. Berling is synonymous of this Victorian workhouse owner, ruthless, only out to make profit. And in essence, Eva Smith is just another employee who he can palm off and get rid of, and then there'll be someone there waiting in line to come in. And the worrying thing was, especially in London, especially in the big cities in the UK, the rising tide, shall we say, of slum-like living and deprivation, poverty, and in essence, really, what I personally find quite interesting and why Priestley, I believe, kind of presents Mr. Burling in this way is this arrogance, this ignorance to ignore what is going on.
Yeah. The adverb sharply to kind of suggest the kind of sharp nature or approach that he took, ruthless nature that he took in firing Eva Smith. And in fact, he says, you've kind of got this idiom here, soon be asking for the earth. What are really the working class asking for? Like respect, equality. So to him, he sees that as even something they shouldn't ask for. You're lucky enough to have a job, and I provided you. I've given you the duty of doing my duty and giving you a job, but that is still
too much. Yeah. It's still too much. It's that. Again, it goes back to Mr. Burling's kind of ignorant attitude, right? Yeah. You're asking for so much when, in essence, really, in nowadays society, in modern society, there's expectation of human rights, of workers' rights, and these things. Do you think, in some ways, that people like Gerald and Mr. Burling wanted to continue this rigid class system? Yeah,
because it's easier for them. Why change something to them that's not broken? They're the ones benefiting from this, so why would they want to change that? Because as Mr. Burling said, it's about him kind of keeping labour costs down, so paying them more would not benefit him, and it's that selfish attitude that he has that we'll see in the next quotation when we start looking at ideas of social responsibility and the lack of social responsibility that he feels that he needs to do.
Do you think Priestley utilises his frustration towards the social system, social hierarchy, through Mr. Burling?
Definitely.
And he kind of, these quotes like asking, what was it again, sorry?
They'll be asking for the earth.
Asking for the earth. Do you think that maybe he encountered people like this through his life?
Well, he's very much from the middle class himself, so that's why I think it's quite interesting, because he has that privilege of the middle class, but he's, I suppose, being the voice for the voiceless in regards to the lower class.
I love that phrase. It's a really good phrase.
Yeah, so it's a case of he sees injustice within his own class, and so he knows that is his right or his responsibility to highlight people like Mr. Burling. And I suppose we dislike Mr. Burling from the very beginning for this reason. We don't like him at any point really in the play.
We dislike him because how Priestley presents
exactly that.
And what you could argue is, to use some historical context, he is representing really. He's not different. He's not unique.
No.
He is synonymous of a workhouse owner, a factory owner of its days. So we're isolating Mr. Burling here, but there was plenty of Mr. Burlings.
And I think that's what Priestley's trying to show. It's like, yes, this is one character, but he does represent the whole. Trying to say it's about us being responsible for each other, and especially if you have money or have privilege, you should be trying to help those who are less fortunate.
Yeah, totally.
So that will go nicely with the second quotation about. But the way some of these cranks talk and write now, you think everybody has to look after everybody else, as if we are mixed up together like bees in a hive, community and all that nonsense.
And that's Mr. Burling talking,
yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes, this is before the inspector comes in. He's giving a speech to the children of the family, so Sheila, Gerald and Eric, and he's saying that, it's more about looking after yourself rather than looking after everybody else.
Okay, so if we start off with the simile, like bees in a hive, what you could argue is that a communist political perspective, a socialist political perspective, promotes the use of the community. And in terms of Priestley's political opinion and the historical context linking into that as well, and how we said before how socialism post World War II in Britain is at its peak. So he feels confident, he feels buoyant by it. And I personally really like the simile, like bees in a hive, because obviously we have one queen bee and everyone's working, aren't they? And it's about building the hive. It's about, in essence, really, a hive is the perfect example of positive community. And London.
And London, really,
and London
is like a hive in the sense of everyone comes to it to find work.
It's drawn to it.
He calls them cranks talk and write now. So he's basically here referring to socialists and saying this idea of people like Priestley. by calling them pranks as well, it's this idea of people who are kind of strange or eccentric in their ideas. They're trying to kind of bend or create a change in society, which he doesn't like. So obviously by calling them cranks, it's kind of a negative association that we make with these socialists, rather than realising that they're there to promote this idea of a change for all.
And at the turn of the 20th century, early 20th century, there was these ideas about focusing on the individual, the welfare state. They were new ideas, but they were often rejected by society. The reason why Mr. Berling is concerned, and he talks about like bees in a hive, and if you give them the world, this kind of thing, it's because it's upsetting his position. He is privileged. He is very rich. And Gerald the same. Gerald is synonymous with this kind of perspective. And what you could argue is Priestley is trying to find points of discussion within the reader relating to their position. Yeah. He's getting the reader to challenge them, right? Audience, sorry.
Being a play. Okay, good. So that then we move on to looking at women and how women are portrayed, because that's such another massive kind of idea and theme within it. We see how the women of the upper classes act, and then obviously we have Eva. So we start off with Mrs. Berlin and Sheila. Mrs. Berlin is her husband's social superior. Sheila's going to marry him into the upper class, which Mr. Berlin's very happy about, because that then allows him to work closer with Gerald's father.
Escalation, yeah.
Exactly. It was more. I don't think he really cares that Sheila's getting married. He's more concerned about the benefits it can have for him and business.
He wanted it. Is it the night shift, right? He's hoping for a night shift, Mr. Berlin.
No, he's hoping that Crofts Limited, Gerald's family, and him can basically work together in business. So he sees the kind of the possibilities that can have for him rather than
selfishness
for his daughter.
Again.
Exactly, even within his own family. And then Mrs. Berlin's her husband's social superior. We see moments where she's quite she tells him off for doing certain things, like he tries to thank the cook and she reproachfully tells him not to say things like that. And
but Victorian women were supposed to be true traditional women.
Exactly,
you're not allowed an opinion. You're
exactly
supposed
that. Sheila is saying he's away all summer. She's like, oh, men with important work to do. So she makes excuses for the fact that men are away and don't do their duties as a husband in that sense, because of the work that they have. Again,
this comparison, Victorian perspective, Edwardian perspective. There's not massive amounts of difference, but Sheila and Mrs. Berlin are another example of
exactly that. And then we have Eva, obviously, who's complete contrast to people like Sheila, because Sheila is going to be married into wealth. She has that security through her marriage through Gerald and her family generally, where Eva does not have that security or protection.
We talk about William Blake's poem London, and we talk about the rising tide of poverty and deprivation and prostitution, alcoholism. Eva Smith is representative in that. Like when she first meets Eric in a bar, and then they both have, and Eric, as you know, is a heavy drinker.
And he turns nasty and basically forces himself on her.
Exactly.
So she doesn't have the rights to be able to speak up against that. So we have things like, throughout the play, she's referred to as a girl. So girls of that class, or girls aren't cheap labour, or in fact she's pretty. Where it's never really a case of her spoken about as a human being or as an individual. She's always referred to as girls, as part of the plural.
Into business, couldn't you? The fact that it's a business. We're ruthless. We want to make money. If she leaves, I'll get another one in, and we're going to work them to the bone. Irrelevant of workers' rights and these kind of things.
So let's talk about that then. So women's rights. We had the suffragette movement during this time, yes?
Yeah, so the suffragette movement was...
When the play was set,
when the play was set, pre-World War I, founded by Emily Pankhurst. And in essence, really, the suffragette movement was promoting women's rights and trying to give women a position in society where they had a voice.
Right.
And lots of women in Britain can be incredibly thankful for they risked their lives. Some even lost their lives to this cause, and it was so important. Interestingly though, post-World War I, women played an enormous role in World War I. When the men were away, they worked in factories, etc., especially ammunition factories. Post-World War I, their efforts was forgotten, was brushed under the carpet. Interestingly, when the play was written, when the play was written post World War II, women during World War II played a similar role. Their role on the home front, again working in factories, etc., 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 was hugely important to the war. But after World War II, that was the difference. Post World War I, their efforts disregarded, brushed under the carpet. Post World War II, women's rights and women's role during the war was actually congratulated. Now, I don't know to what extent, but I do know that it was congratulated and it was recognised, and that was a fundamental change.
Yeah.
But women had to really struggle, and in essence, really, if you take Mrs. Berlin, this kind of stiff upper lip and don't say anything, and golly gosh, I better not say what I think, and all these kind of things, and I better not say my opinion because I'm a woman.
But it's that facade of respectability, as spoken about before. They had to come across in a way that was being respectful for their husbands and society generally. But there's also a part towards the end when they find the inspector's not real. Mrs. Berlin says to Sheila, "Now just be quiet so your father can decide what we ought to do." And in the stage direction it goes, looks expectantly at Berlin. So again, it's this idea that she's looking to the man to make decisions and looking to the man to solve the problems. And I suppose in a way that links to war in the sense that World War, because women couldn't look to men anymore because a lot of them had gone to war. You see what I mean? So it's that idea of...
But this is what's frustrating, and I imagine for women that helped in World War One must have been so frustrating post World War One because they did these things. They did these things. They used to work
to look to themselves for support in that sense, and then they come back and then they're back into the roles of this traditional woman when they've had to be so independent.
So here's a question for you, Miss. Why do you think Priestley presents Miss Berlin in this way, Mrs. Berlin?
To show, because she represents that middle upper class woman and those very old traditional ideas.
Is he criticising it?
Yeah, definitely, because she's the one out of all of them that takes no responsibility at all. And actually, because she owned the charity where she should have been there to help Eva. Eva's come to her pregnant, needs her help. Because she calls herself Mrs. Berlin, she then decides that she's going to prejudice against her case. And so for me, that shows, again, this problem with women. Not with all women, but I'm saying the problem with certain things. It's this idea that sometimes women uphold the patriarchy. And we uphold this because you see it in things like Handmaid's Tale, where the women don't like each other, or women are against each other, rather than realising the problem is the patriarchy. And so here she's rather than helping her fellow woman who's there pregnant and poor and alone, she's saying, I'll go look to the father of the child to help you, rather than doing her responsibility as another woman to help her, all because of her class. Class is more important to her than her obligation as a woman. So and that shows us the very traditional views of maybe people of the upper class, women from the upper class. They, again, created these charities, but a lot of them didn't actually do much to help people. But it's that facade of respectability where, look at what we're doing, let's pretend of what we're doing, rather than actually making any real change.
We talk about that today, don't we? We talk about how often do we see celebrities on TV saying they're going to do this and that, and then in reality, what do they actually do?
Exactly that.
Status becomes with a responsibility, and you could argue that
status is more important than their duty as a woman. In that sense,
I totally
where we start to see a change a bit really with Sheila, because she sees the problem she had, or how her actions affected Eva Smith, and she's desperately sorry, and she wanted to, if she could, she would make a change. But at the same time, we still see at the end when Gerald offers her the ring back, she said she needs time to think about it. So again, it's we can evaluate, make a judgment on this. Will she take Gerald back? If she does, is she going to go back to the same way that she's always lived? Because she's made a change within the play, within these few hours. But
I would argue that's the kind of a point in the play where you sort of feel like you've made so much progress. But then you've made so much progress. But both of them, Eric and Sheila, both start off synonymous of their class, belligerent, argumentative, reluctant to take any responsibility. Then we have this process of change. And then really with Sheila there, it's that...
Is she going to continue the change? We also see this idea of women, people like Eva Smith and Gerald, for example, and Eric, they both kind of use and abuse her to their own gain. So even with Gerald, yes, he puts her up and allows her to stay at his friend's house to help her, because when he met her at the Palace Bar, she was being kind of harassed. And so he's given this impression that of him helping her. However, we know that he starts an affair with Eva Smith, and then when time is done, he kind of disposes of her.
Discards her, yeah.
Exactly. Same with Eric. He also meets her in the Palace Bar. He takes advantage and he turns nasty, and then he ends up getting her pregnant. And again, she's still kind of left alone. So we kind of see how women of the working class were kind of more seen for as objects and as used and abused in the sense for kind of sexual gain a lot of the time. Especially someone like Gerald. He comes across as this man who takes, I suppose, out of all the characters, he's the less responsible for her death because he treated her nice for a time. But I actually don't believe that. I think actually he's in somewhat more responsible because you allowed her to be, you became the most important person in her life, but that wasn't the case for him. She wasn't the one.
A bit of a dream
exactly.
as well.
I suppose she may have probably known what would happen throughout, but it's still the idea of he would never be with someone like Eva. He always would end up with someone like Sheila. Even Sheila's really not part of the same class, so actually he's even downgraded in that sense, but she's still someone he can marry or take home. Eva Smith is never going to be that person to him, and so in a sense that when he's finished, he'll go back to his life, where with Eva that won't be the case. And the fact that, he didn't speak to her for months afterwards, you didn't even check to see how she was doing. If it was someone that you cared about.
He kind of effectively just chucked money at the problem, didn't he? He's got money, he's got status, so I'm just going to chuck money at the problem. And
yeah, same with Eric. So it's a case of, you do feel for Eva because they do just kind of use their status and their gender in a sense to take advantage of her. And
unfortunately, that was iconic of that particular period. There was women had to struggle, especially women of the lower working class, and also as well when we think about contraception and these kind of things, it was women had lots of children, they had lots of mouths to feed, and in essence, really, looking from it from a more modern perspective with the joys of hindsight, they probably had to do these things. They probably had to get by and to make money. And at the end of the day,
use your body is something that you have.
Exactly, it's one of the oldest professions around, right? And unfortunately, with the growth during the Victorian period, we see a growth of gin bars and of like pubs and the sort of drinking culture. Drinking culture has always been around, but during the Victorian period, you could argue it really escalated because of people had a lot more expenditure, people had more income, and what used to happen was you'd get young, wealthy men who would be going to these palace bars and meeting poor working class women, taking advantage, throwing their money at them. And I suppose Priestley really, even in 1945 when he was writing this play, he probably had some experience of this, right? He comes from a middle class background. He probably had some people when he was growing up who used and abused these working class women in this way, and maybe this is Priestley's attempt at trying to highlight this as a bigger issue. And you could argue really Priestley is very, very good at that, drawing the audience's attention to a bigger issue. And I suppose in some ways, yes, Eva Smith by definition was not a prostitute, but she was used and abused, and later on she becomes, isn't she?
Palace Bar, where they met her, is a place that was notorious for prostitutes. And it's interesting how they're trying to get her away from people like Mekety, who was seen as the man who was harassing her. But Gerald, why were you there in the first place? The fact that he's described as a man about town in the beginning suggests to us also that he was this person that did things like this as well. But because of his status in class and they can hide those things. And it's the same at the end with Gerald. He goes away, he's like, I need time to think, about like what's happened, and you feel kind of like, he feels bad for this situation. But he leaves to find out that Eva Smith, the inspector's not real. So it's like, because he knows that he has to still, he doesn't want a public scandal. It's the facade. And so actually, and we kind of get that even now with the upper class and even with royalty, you don't hear anything bad really that they do.
No.
Because they are, I suppose, they have to
gagging
be good.
orders. And
exactly.
Things, right?
So I do think, I think he's just as to blame as the rest of them, and the fact that he doesn't really take responsibility and he goes and finds the inspector's not real is that idea again of him not having to, or trying to find a way out, like Mr. Berlin. It's on to what we want to talk about in regards to today's society and whether or not Priestley's ideas are as relevant as they were back then. What do you think?
I think at the moment there's a huge focus on the individual. I think society is getting better and better. Or maybe a sort of contrary point, you could argue that the upper classes and the elite are just better at hiding what they're getting up to. I do think that most top class businessmen are ruthless. They have to be. And there is a lot. I tell you what's really, really positive about this, our particular period we're living at the moment. There's a lot more pressure on people to consider others.
Yes.
And that's something from a historical perspective that has got better over time. And then, and charity and the focus on the individual, the welfare state and those sorts of things. But nothing's perfect.
But is it? Because are we not going back to more traditional ideas in the set, or conservative ideas, because we have conservative in power, especially in the UK, and we have like our NHS is kind of being ripped apart really in regards to a lot of it's being privatised, education as well, people looking after themselves. We've got a lot of kind of religious and racial hatred as well, and keeping people apart. So maybe it doesn't feel as much about class, but it is more to do with I
suppose really you could argue sort of Neanderthal man had to look out for his Neanderthal family, right? And it was that caveman approach, and worryingly, why have we not progressed to where we should, if we help each other out, if we promote more of a community sense, then things only get better. Get to know different people of different faiths, different religions, different colours, and get to know who they are and where they're coming from. And I suppose Priestley was trying to promote that particular perspective, but I would say on this matter that I'm happy that there's been progress in terms of like charitable work and those things, but there's still plenty more to be done. And in truth, there's lots and lots of countries, I'm sure you guys can think of lots and lots of examples in which people are still suffering Victorian style situations, slum-like living and stuff like that, and it's sad to see.
So I do think this idea of responsibility is still very much apparent, and we are still learning. We've been taught in fire and blood and anguish because there's so many wars and so many conflicts or
have we learned
things. So have we learned anything? And this play was written how long? 8:45. Well, my maths is not very good. A long time ago.
Couple
years, couple decades. And we still don't. I don't feel like we have learned from it because we still keep seeing this conflict between people and countries, and Okay, and so that is it. I think we've babbled on for a while. Hopefully, you have some better understanding of what was going on during the time, so you can make more relevant links to the context. Remember, as I said, it is 6 marks, so it's not about you writing historical essay or history essay, but please don't. But still, it's about you trying to make those meaningful links to context and then linking it back to the text. So hopefully we've given you enough there, and the quotations as well, to make those more relevant links to the context.
Yeah, what you could do as well is try and pause the video, maybe write down some of the quotes that Miss has given you, and write them down, and maybe in the comments you could give us some of your feedback on how you think it links to the context, or even some of the things we've discussed. You could kind of talk about that as well. Just help
leave it in the comment section below. So yes, thank you for your time. Hopefully in the future we will do a few more of these. What would you like to see? Maybe is it you want to know more about the Elizabethan period? Then you might just
do some more research
about that, or even if some of the A-level texts, there's a lot of that context. So let us know what you want to see. You can follow Mr. Roberts. He's on Twitter and on Instagram.
Yes, that's correct. At Mr. and Mr. Roberts _.
So you can follow him on there, and obviously don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and you can also follow Educated Minds on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. Until next time, see you later.
Ciao.
Ciao. Ciao. Bye.
International.
Yeah, but you're not even in where.
Ciao. Okay, Masalama.
Masalama.
Hang on, so I can do that.
I've got to include this bit, by the way, just let you know.
Masalama.
Masalama.
Or in Korean, 안녕히 가세요.
I'll just bye.
Goodbye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Oh, that was fun.